At the gym, he put his hands on my wife as if I were invisible. Then he laughed and said, "Your husband is weak." That day, I showed him what true strength looks like. The entire gym fell silent. My wife came home from the gym looking uncomfortable, and that was the first red flag I should have paid more attention to. She had been working with this new personal trainer for about 3 weeks, and lately, something felt off about the whole situation. "How was your session?" I asked as she walked through the door, her gym bag slung over her shoulder. She paused longer than usual. "Fine, just an intense workout, you know." But her body language told a different story. She avoided my eyes, headed straight for the kitchen to get some water, and seemed more tense than someone who just finished a good workout should be. Over the next few days, I started noticing patterns. She would mention weird remarks her trainer made about relationships, about how most husbands don't know how to appreciate what they have, or how he told her she was too good for an ordinary gym routine. When I questioned her about his comments, she quickly brushed them off. "He's just trying to motivate me," she would say, but her tone suggested she didn't believe it any more than I did. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening. She walked in looking genuinely upset. "Is everything okay?" I asked, setting down my laptop. She sat on the couch next to me, fidgeting with her water bottle. "I think my trainer might be, I don't know, crossing some boundaries." Now I had her full attention. What kind of boundaries? Today, he kept adjusting my posture by putting his hands on my waist, my shoulders, my back, way more than necessary. And he made this comment about how I must not be getting enough attention at home because I seemed tense. I felt my jaw clench. He said what? It gets worse. When I told him I was perfectly happy at home, he laughed and said something about how all married women say that until they meet a real man who knows how to treat them right. The audacity of this guy was already making my blood boil, but I kept my voice calm. "How did you react?" I told him I had to cut the session short, and I left. But now I am wondering if I should find a new trainer. The problem is, I really like this gym, and switching would be complicated. I looked at my wife, this amazing woman who was dealing with a predator disguised as a fitness professional, and I made a decision right then and there. "You aren't switching gyms," I said firmly, "but I think it is time I meet this trainer of yours." She looked surprised. "You want to come to the gym? I want to see exactly what kind of professional we are dealing with here. And tomorrow is Friday. What time is your session?" 6 p.m. But you don't have to. I'll be there at 5:30 p.m. I want to observe this guy in action before your session starts. The next day, I arrived at the gym early and got a guest pass. The place was packed with the after-work crowd, and it didn't take long to spot the trainer my wife had described. Tall, overly muscular, with that typical gym bro swagger that screams insecurity masked as confidence. I watched him work with a female client for about 10 minutes, and what I saw made my blood boil. His hands were constantly on her, adjusting her posture with lingering touches that went far beyond professional instruction. The woman looked uncomfortable, but seemed too polite to say anything. When that session ended, I saw him approach another woman who was working out alone. Within minutes, he was offering unsolicited advice and finding excuses to touch her arm, her shoulder, her lower back. This wasn't training. This was a predator using his position to harass women. Then my wife walked in. I watched from across the room as this guy's entire demeanor changed when he saw her. His smile grew more predatory, his posture more aggressive. He immediately walked over to her, and I could see he was standing closer than necessary, leaning in when he spoke. That was when I knew this situation was going to change drastically. This was no longer just an overzealous trainer. This was a guy who thought he could disrespect my wife, make her uncomfortable, and get away with it. I finished my quick workout and walked over to them as he was setting up for her session. "Hey, honey," I said, stepping up with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. My wife looked relieved to see me. "Oh, this is my husband I told you about." The trainer turned to me, and I immediately saw that sizing up look in his eyes. He was evaluating me as competition, which told me everything I needed to know about his intentions with my wife. "Nice to meet you," he said, holding out his hand with an unnecessarily firm grip. "Your wife is making excellent progress. She has incredible potential." The way he said potential made my skin crawl, but I kept a neutral expression. "I can see that," I replied, easily matching the strength of his grip. "She told me you are very hands-on in your training." His smile wavered slightly, but he recovered quickly. "That's how you get results." Most people need that personal touch to really push their limits. I am sure they do, I said, sounding perfectly polite while my eyes stayed locked on his. I look forward to seeing your methods in action. For the first time since I had been watching him, the trainer looked uncertain. Good. He was starting to realize this situation had just become much more complicated for him. I positioned myself on a nearby bench where I could observe the entire workout without being too obvious. What I saw over the next hour confirmed all my suspicions about this guy. The trainer, who introduced himself as Chad, started my wife's workout with some standard squats, except his version of posture correction involved placing both hands on her hips from behind and staying there much longer than any legitimate adjustment required. Feel that stance, he said, his voice carrying across the floor. You really need to sink into it. Let me guide you through the movement. My wife's discomfort was obvious to me, but Chad either didn't notice or didn't care. His hands moved from her hips to her lower back, then to her shoulders, maintaining constant contact throughout the set. During her rest break, I overheard their conversation. You know, most married women lose their drive after a few years, Chad said, leaning against the squat rack. They get comfortable, stop taking care of themselves. But you are different. You still care about looking attractive. My wife shifted uncomfortably. I just want to stay healthy. Of course, health, Chad laughed. But let's be honest, you wouldn't be here if you didn't want to look good. The question is, who are you trying to look good for? The audacity of this question made me grip my water bottle tighter. My wife muttered something about feeling good about herself, but Chad wasn't finished. See, that's what I like about you. You are honest about your desire for improvement. Most husbands don't appreciate it when their wives put in this kind of effort. They feel threatened by it. I saw my wife's face tighten. My husband is very supportive of my fitness goals. Sure he is, Chad said in a tone that suggested he didn't believe it for a second. But support and appreciation are two different things. A woman like you needs someone who truly sees the work she puts in. He moved closer to her for the next exercise, the bench press. As he spotted her, his positioning was completely inappropriate. Instead of standing at the head of the bench like any professional coach would, he positioned himself on the side, leaning over her in a way that gave him a clear view down her sports bra. Good form, he said, his voice lower now. Really push through that resistance. You are stronger than you think. His hands were on the bar, but he kept brushing her arms and shoulders. When she finished the set, he helped her sit up by placing his hand on her back and leaving it there while he spoke. You know what I think? Chad said, sitting on the bench next to her closer than necessary. I think you hold yourself back in your workouts. I mean, you are capable of so much more, but something is holding you back. My wife looked confused. I am trying my best. Are you? Or are you playing it safe because that is what you are used to? His voice had taken on this pseudo-psychological tone that made me want to walk over immediately. Sometimes we need someone to push us past our comfort zones. Someone who isn't afraid to demand excellence. The implications of these words were crystal clear. This wasn't about fitness anymore, and we all knew it. During the next exercise, leg curls, Chad's behavior escalated again. He positioned himself where he could watch her form from behind, making comments about her flexibility and how she should really feel the stretch. Breathe through it, he coached, placing his hand on her lower back again. Don't fight the feeling. Sometimes the best results come from surrendering control to someone who knows what they are doing. I had heard enough. I finished my own workout and walked over as they were wrapping up. How did it go? I asked my wife, but kept my eyes on Chad. Great session, Chad answered for her. She has natural athletic ability. She really responds well to firm guidance. The double meaning didn't escape anyone. My wife looked embarrassed. Chad looked smug. And I looked like I was deciding whether to address this right now or handle it differently. Firm guidance, I repeated slowly. That is an interesting term for a fitness coach. Chad's smile widened. The results speak for themselves. Your wife is making incredible progress with my methods. I bet she is, I said. And what exactly do your methods entail? Personalized attention, tactile corrections, breaking down the mental barriers that hold people back. Every sentence was delivered with increasing arrogance. Most people are too comfortable with mediocrity. They need someone willing to push them harder than they would push themselves. My wife started gathering her things, clearly wanting to end this conversation, but I wasn't done. And you consider yourself qualified to determine what people need? I asked. 3 years of experience, dozens of satisfied clients, Chad replied. Especially women. They appreciate having someone who isn't afraid to challenge them. The way he emphasized women made it clear this conversation had nothing to do with fitness anymore. This guy was openly telling me he specialized in pushing boundaries with female clients, and he thought I was too passive to do anything about it. Challenge, I said thoughtfully. That's one way to describe it. Chad stepped closer, using his height advantage to try and intimidate me. Look, your wife came to me because she wanted results. If you aren't comfortable with professional training methods, maybe she should find a less effective coach. The threat was barely veiled. He was essentially telling me that if I had a problem with his behavior, my wife would have to give up her fitness goals. It was manipulation disguised as professional advice. I smiled at him, the kind of smile that should have warned him he was making a huge mistake. You know what, Chad? I think my wife is getting exactly the kind of training she needs. I will come to more of these sessions to see your methods in action. For the first time, his confidence cracked slightly. That usually isn't necessary. Most husbands trust me to handle their wives' training professionally. I am not most husbands, I said simply. And this isn't about trust. It's about making sure everyone understands exactly what professional boundaries look like. Chad's jaw clenched, but he forced another smile. Of course, you are welcome anytime. As we walked to the car, my wife was quiet until we were inside. That was awkward, she finally said. That guy tests limits, I replied, and he just found out where mine are. Over the next week, I made sure to show up at the gym during my wife's training sessions. Each time, Chad's behavior became more brazen, as if my presence was some kind of challenge he had to overcome rather than a boundary to respect. On Tuesday evening, I arrived early and struck up a conversation with the gym manager, a woman in her 40s who seemed genuinely professional. How long has Chad been working here? I asked casually while stretching. About 8 months, she replied. He came with good references from his old gym. Is he popular with the clients? She paused, and I saw there was more to the story. He is effective with certain clients, though we have had to have a few conversations about maintaining professional boundaries. That sentence told me everything. This wasn't the first time Chad's behavior had been an issue. What kind of conversations? I pressed gently. The manager looked around, then lowered her voice. Between you and me, we've had 3 complaints in the last 6 months. All from female clients who felt he was too hands-on during sessions. Nothing actionable, legally speaking, but enough that we are keeping an eye on things. 3 complaints, and he was still working here. He was very careful in how he operated. He never crossed the line enough to justify getting fired, and he always had explanations for his training methods. Plus, he brought in revenue. I filed that information away. Chad was a repeat offender who had learned how to stay just shy of being fired. That explained his confidence and his willingness to push boundaries. When my wife's session started, I watched Chad do his usual routine. But today, he seemed determined to provoke a reaction from me. During deadlifts, he positioned himself directly behind her, his chest almost brushing her back as he guided her form. His hands were on her hips, her waist, her shoulders, all under the guise of professional instruction. Feel how your body wants to move, he said, his voice loud enough for me to hear across the gym. Don't fight your natural instincts. Trust me to guide you where you need to go. My wife finished the set and stepped away quickly, but Chad followed her movement, maintaining that inappropriate proximity. You are tensing up, he observed. Something at home is stressing you out. I am fine, my wife replied, but I could see her discomfort growing. Are you? Because I feel the tension in your muscles. That usually means there is conflict in other areas of life. Maybe communication issues with your husband. The audacity astounded me. This guy was now trying to create marital problems while pretending to be a concerned fitness professional. My marriage is perfectly fine, my wife said firmly. Chad laughed. That is what everyone says. But the body doesn't lie. I work with a lot of married women, and they carry all their stress differently. The ones in healthy relationships are more relaxed, more confident. They move with freedom. He was essentially telling my wife her marriage was the problem while positioning himself as the solution. Classic predator behavior. What are you implying? My wife asked, clearly frustrated now. I am not implying anything, Chad said with fake innocence. I'm just saying that when women feel truly appreciated, truly valued, it shows in their posture. You seem to be holding something back. That was when I stood up and walked over. "How is the session going?" I asked, sounding friendly but keeping my eyes locked on Chad. "Just helping your wife work through her tension," Chad replied, that same smug smile plastered on his face. "She's been carrying a lot of stress lately." "Really?" I said, looking at my wife with genuine concern. "Anything I should know about?" My wife shook her head quickly. "It's nothing, just normal workout tension." But Chad wasn't done stirring the pot. "Sometimes the tension comes from feeling underappreciated. Women need to feel valued, truly seen for who they are. When that is missing at home, it manifests physically." The implications were becoming more direct. He was openly suggesting now that I wasn't meeting my wife's needs, while positioning himself as someone who could. "Interesting theory," I said calmly. "And you developed this insight through your extensive training in psychology?" Chad's smile wavered slightly. "I have worked with enough women to recognize the patterns." "Patterns," I repeated. "Like what exactly?" "Like how married women react to male attention when they aren't getting enough at home. They light up when someone actually pays attention to them, really focuses on their needs." He was being so blatant now that even other gym members were starting to notice. Two women nearby had stopped their workout to listen, and I could see them exchanging glances. "So you make it a point to provide that attention?" I asked. "I provide professional training services," Chad said, but his tone suggested he provided much more. "If clients feel valued and appreciated during that process, that is just good customer service." "Customer service," I said slowly. "Is that what you call telling married women they aren't appreciated at home?" Chad's confidence was building again. He seemed to think he was winning this conversation. "I call it honesty. Most husbands take their wives for granted. They stop seeing them as attractive, desirable women and start treating them like roommates." The guy was openly insulting me now while hitting on my wife. His arrogance had reached levels that demanded a response. "And you don't take them for granted?" I asked. "I see every woman who trains with me as someone special, someone worth investing time and attention in. That's why they get results with me that they don't get anywhere else." He was practically advertising his services as more than fitness training at this point. My wife looked mortified, but Chad seemed oblivious to how inappropriate he was being. "Fascinating approach," I said. "And how many of these special women have you helped feel properly appreciated?" Chad's chest puffed out with pride. "More than I can count. Women remember what it feels like to be treated like they matter." That was when one of the women listening nearby walked over. She was probably in her late 30s, fit, and clearly agitated. "Excuse me," she said to Chad. "You were talking about treating women like they matter." Chad turned to her with that same predatory smile, always thrilled to help. "Because I remember how you treated me like I mattered," she interrupted him. "Until I told you I wasn't interested in your after-hours training sessions. And suddenly my form was terrible and my attitude was the problem." Chad's face went pale. "I don't know what you were talking about." "Of course you don't," she said loud enough for half the gym to hear. "Just like you don't remember telling me my husband probably didn't appreciate my flexibility or suggesting I could benefit from private sessions at your place." More people were paying attention now. Chad looked around nervously, realizing his reputation was about to take a serious hit. "This is a misunderstanding," he said quickly. "The only misunderstanding," I said, stepping closer to him, "is thinking this behavior would continue without consequences." Chad looked between me and the growing audience, and for the first time since I had met him, he looked truly worried. The next evening, I arrived at the gym 10 minutes before my wife's session. Chad was working with another female client, and I saw him significantly tone down his usual behavior. Word of the previous day's confrontation was apparently spreading. When my wife arrived, Chad's demeanor was noticeably different. Gone were the overly familiar touches and inappropriate comments. He kept a professional distance and focused strictly on exercise instructions for about 20 minutes. I thought the message had finally gotten through. Then his ego took over again. During a lat pull-down exercise, Chad positioned himself behind my wife to spot her. As she finished a rep, he leaned in and said something in her ear that made her immediately shrink away. I couldn't hear what he said, but her reaction told me it wasn't about proper form. She turned to look at him with obvious disgust, but Chad just smiled and stepped back. That was when he noticed me watching and decided to deliberately escalate things. "Your husband keeps a very close eye on our sessions," Chad said, loud enough for me to hear. It must be nice to have someone so protective. The way he said protective made it sound like insecure. My wife looked uncomfortable with the attention this was drawing from other gym members. He is just supportive, she replied quietly. Sure, Chad said, his voice carrying that familiar condescending tone. Though I wonder if all this supervision comes from trust, or from knowing he can't compete. I stood up from my bench and walked over. Compete with what exactly? Chad turned to me with renewed confidence. Being called out the day before hadn't humbled him. It had just made him more determined to prove his dominance. Just discussing different training philosophies, he said with fake innocence. Philosophies, I repeated. And what philosophy involves telling clients their spouses can't compete? The philosophy that believes in pushing people past their comfort zones, Chad replied, stepping closer to me. Some people are naturally more aggressive, more willing to take what they want. Others are more passive. He was openly calling me passive now, while positioning himself as the aggressive alpha. The insult was clear to everyone within earshot. Interesting theory, I said calmly. Care to elaborate on what you think you want to take? Chad's smile widened. He thought he was winning this psychological game. I think some men know how to appreciate what they have, and others just assume it will always be there. My wife looked mortified. Can we please just finish the workout? But Chad wasn't done proving his point. You know what I've learned working with women? They respond to confidence. Real confidence, not the kind that needs reinforcement or supervision. He was directly challenging my presence at the gym while insulting my masculinity in front of my wife. The guy had apparently learned nothing from the humiliation of the day before. Real confidence, I said thoughtfully. And you consider yourself a good example of that. I consider myself someone who isn't afraid to go after what he wants, Chad replied, his chest puffing out. Some guys talk. Some guys actually perform. The sexual innuendo was blatant. Now he was essentially telling my wife he could satisfy her better than me, while standing 3 feet away from me. Perform, I repeated slowly. Like a personal trainer who hits on married clients? Like a man who recognizes quality when he sees it, Chad shot back. And who isn't afraid to let that quality know it is being wasted. That crossed every line. He had just told my wife she was wasted on me, right to my face, in front of a gym full of people. My wife stepped back, clearly disgusted. This is completely inappropriate. But Chad misinterpreted her disgust as playing hard to get. He stepped closer to her, close enough that she had to take another step back. What is inappropriate is settling for less than you deserve, he said, reaching out to touch her arm. That was when I stepped forward and grabbed his wrist before his hand could make contact. The only thing that is inappropriate, I said, my voice deadly calm, is thinking you can put your hands on my wife. Chad tried to yank his wrist free, but I maintained my grip. He looked surprised by my strength. Let go of me, he said, trying to sound authoritative but coming off nervous. With pleasure, I replied, releasing his wrist. Right after we established some boundaries. Chad rubbed his wrist and stepped back, but his ego wouldn't let him back down completely. Boundaries? You mean like the boundary between a weak man and a strong man? The insult hung in the air like a challenge. Several people had stopped their workouts to watch this unfold. Weak? I said, slowly nodding. Is that what you think I am? I think you are a man who needs to supervise his wife because he knows he can't satisfy her, Chad said, his voice rising. I think you are threatened by real men who know how to treat women right. My wife's face flushed with anger. How dare you speak to my husband like that? But Chad was too far gone to care about her reaction. He had committed to this confrontation and was determined to prove his dominance. I am speaking the truth, he said, turning back to me. Your wife deserves someone who appreciates her body, someone who knows how to make her feel like a real woman. He actually reached out toward my wife's waist as he said that, as if to demonstrate his point about appreciating her body. That was when I grabbed his wrist again, but this time I didn't let go. You want to know the difference between weak and strong? I asked, my voice still calm despite the fury building inside me. Chad tried to pull free, but quickly realized he couldn't. Let go of me right now. The difference, I continued, is that weak men need to touch women without permission to feel powerful. Strong men earn respect without laying a finger on anyone. I squeezed his wrist just hard enough to make my point. Chad's face went pale as he realized the difference in strength between us. You are hurting me, he said, his bravado evaporating. No, I replied calmly. This is restraint. Hurting you would be responding to your disrespect the way it deserves. Chad looked around desperately, realizing his intimidation tactics had completely failed. The audience he had wanted to impress was now watching him get humiliated by the weak husband he had insulted. Look, this is just a misunderstanding, he said quickly. The only misunderstanding, I said, finally releasing his wrist, is thinking you could disrespect my wife and walk away unchanged. Chad rubbed his wrist again, his confidence completely shattered. What does that mean? I smiled at him. The kind of smile that promised consequences were coming. It means your education and respect is just beginning. Chad rubbed his wrist, rage building in his eyes. The humiliation of being physically restrained was eating at him, and I could see his desperation to salvage his reputation. You think grabbing my wrist makes you tough? Chad said, his voice shaking. That was a cheap shot. Several gym members gathered around, sensing this wasn't over. My wife stepped closer to me, wanting to leave, but Chad wasn't done. How about we settle this properly? Chad challenged. Let's see who is really man enough to back up his words. He was challenging me to a fight. His ego couldn't handle being bested. Settle what exactly? I asked. If you can handle real competition, or if you are just another weak husband who talks big, Chad said, rolling his shoulders. My wife pulled on my arm. Let's go. He isn't worth it. Chad sneered. Listen to your wife. She knows you can't handle this. You're right, I said. I should listen to my wife, especially when she is trying to protect you from something you aren't ready for. Chad laughed. Protect me? From what? From learning the difference between gym muscles and real strength. Chad's face darkened. You think I am all show? Let's do this right. Arm wrestling, right here, right now. The crowd murmured with anticipation. Someone dragged over a bench. When you lose, I said, you will apologize to every woman you have harassed and explain your methods to the manager. Deal, Chad said confidently. We locked hands. Chad immediately gave it everything, his face contorting. For 30 seconds, our hands stayed vertical as I let him exhaust his strength. Then I started applying pressure. Slowly, steadily, I forced his hand down. Chad's eyes widened as he realized he was losing despite everything he had. This is impossible, he panted. This is real strength, I replied. The kind that doesn't need to prove itself by disrespecting women. I slammed his hand down. Chad stared in shock, but his ego wouldn't accept defeat. In his frustration, Chad threw a wild punch toward my face. I caught his fist in my palm. Chad's eyes widened. Now you've committed assault, I said calmly, in front of witnesses with cameras recording. I applied pressure to his trapped fist until he dropped to his knees. Please, stop. I am sorry. Tell that to my wife, and to all the women you have harassed. Chad looked up with tears in his eyes. I am sorry I disrespected you and your marriage. I was wrong. The gym manager stepped forward. Have you been harassing clients? Chad nodded miserably. Yes. You are fired immediately. The sirens approached, as someone had called 911. Paramedics arrived and examined Chad's hand. No serious damage, but enough pain to remember this lesson. As they loaded him onto a stretcher, Chad looked back at me. I understand now, he said quietly. I understand the difference. My wife and I walked to our car in silence. I can't believe that happened, she said. Some people only learn through consequences, I replied. Chad just got the education he needed. The police finished taking statements, and the video evidence made everything clear. Chad had thrown the first punch, and I had acted in self-defense. Multiple witnesses confirmed his pattern of harassment toward female clients. 2 days later, the gym manager called me personally. I wanted to thank you, she said. After what happened, 3 other women came forward with complaints about Chad. We should have acted sooner. What is being done about it? I asked. He has been terminated permanently. We are also implementing new policies for personal trainer conduct and mandatory training on professional boundaries. Plus, we are reviewing all past complaints more seriously. The manager paused. We would also like to offer you and your wife free memberships for the next year as an apology for what you both endured. News spread quickly through the gym community. Women who had felt uncomfortable with Chad's behavior finally felt safe to speak up. It turned out his pattern went back years, across multiple gyms. My wife found a new trainer within a week. A female professional who focused on results without the drama. During her first session, I watched from across the room as she worked out with genuine enthusiasm, free from the stress Chad had created. "How is the new trainer?" I asked afterward. "Amazing," my wife said, her smile genuine for the first time in weeks. "Real professional instruction. No inappropriate comments. No unnecessary touching. Just a great workout." That evening, she brought up what had happened. "I still can't believe how you handled that situation," she said. "Most men would have either ignored it or lost their temper immediately." "I wasn't going to let someone disrespect you," I replied. "But losing my temper would have made me the problem instead of the solution. The way you stayed calm until he crossed the final line was impressive." "Calm doesn't mean passive," I said. "Sometimes protecting what matters requires patience until the right moment." A week later, we heard through the gym grapevine that Chad had been arrested. Apparently, one of the women who came forward had proof of his unwanted advances outside the gym. His pattern of behavior had finally caught up with him legally. The new gym policies were working well. Trainers now worked in more visible areas. Mandatory reporting procedures were established, and clients felt comfortable raising concerns without fear of retaliation. My wife's confidence returned quickly. Without Chad's psychological manipulation, she threw herself into her fitness goals with renewed energy. Her new trainer helped her get better results in a month than Chad had delivered in 3. "I realized something," my wife told me after a particularly good workout. "Chad wasn't trying to make me stronger. He was trying to make me dependent on his validation." Classic manipulative tactics. I nodded. Make someone doubt their worth, then position yourself as the solution. "But you never made me feel like I needed to be protected. You just protected me when it mattered." That was the difference. I hadn't tried to control the situation or my wife's choices. I had simply made it clear that disrespect would not be tolerated. Then I had followed through when necessary. 3 months later, we ran into Chad at a supermarket. He was working the checkout, his gym career apparently over. When he saw us, his face went pale. "Sir," he said quietly as he scanned our items. "Ma'am, I hope you are both doing well." His demeanor was completely different. Gone was the arrogant predator who thought muscles made him untouchable. In his place was someone who had learned that true strength comes from character, not physical intimidation. "We are doing great," I replied evenly. Chad nodded, avoiding my eyes. "I am glad, and I am still sorry for everything. I learned a lot from what happened." As we walked to our car, my wife reflected on the encounter. "He seemed like a completely different person," she observed. "Sometimes consequences are the best teacher," I said. "Chad learned that being strong and being a bully are opposite things." "And what did you learn?" she asked with a smile. "That protecting what matters doesn't require violence or drama. It just requires being ready to act when the line is crossed." The gym became our regular routine again, but now it was what it should have been from the start, a place to work on fitness goals without drama or harassment. My wife hit every goal she had set for herself, working with trainers who respected her as a person rather than seeing her as a target. Chad's replacement was a professional in his 50s who treated every client with genuine respect. The difference was night and day. 6 months later, the gym asked me to speak to their staff about recognizing and handling inappropriate behavior. I agreed, not because I liked the attention, but because other women deserve to work out without harassment. "The key," I told the staff, "is understanding that true strength protects others. Fake strength preys on them. When you see the difference, you know exactly what kind of person you are dealing with." That lesson served us well beyond the gym. My wife knew she was with someone who would stand up for what matters. And I knew she was someone worth standing up for. Chad learned that muscles without character are just decoration. And every woman in that gym learned what real protection looks like when someone who cares decides enough is enough. Comment. Reflecting on this story reminds me just how vital it is to protect our own peace. Setting firm boundaries is not about inviting conflict. It is about honoring our self-respect. I have learned that true strength is rarely loud or aggressive. It is often found in quiet patience and the courage to act when a line has been crossed. I also believe that people can change, but that change usually starts with accountability for one's actions. Choosing to treat others with decency is a powerful reflection of our own character. It is how we protect not just the people we care about, but our own inner calm as well. I hope this gives you a moment to reflect on the boundaries that keep you safe and well. Remember to be kind to yourself and to the people around you. At the end of the day, a little mutual respect makes the world a better place for all of us. If you like the stories, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.